everyone, and welcome to Sorter TV. Today, we're talking about what it really means to work strategically and how that shows up in product, design, and content. I'm joined by Torrey Podmajersky, author of UX Skills for Business Strategy, and she's here to tell us more. Torrey, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Vaishali.
So you've had such an interesting career at the intersection of UX, content, and product, and now you're helping organizations think more strategically about how these pieces come together. So we're excited to dig into your perspective. So start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background, your career journey, and how you got to where you are today.
Well, it is weird that I have a physics degree and I work in UX. I joined Xbox, working at Microsoft in Xbox in 2010, on the strength of my physics degree and that I had been teaching high school science for 9 years before that. And I talked to the hiring manager and I'm like, why do you want me for this? And how am I going to be successful in it? And he says, oh, no, you're going to be great at this, which, pro tip, all managers should do that. He says, he told me that I was going to be good at it because of my interest in getting people to what they wanted to be doing and what they needed to be doing. He said, if you can get teenagers to pass a test at the end of a unit on chemistry, you can definitely get them setting up their settings right on Xbox. It was wild to me. And yet that is the skill set that I put into practice immediately and kept putting into practice.
Yeah, that's a really unique path across multiple disciplines. Looking back, what experiences would you say most shaped how you think about business strategy today?
Yeah, so first it was starting at Microsoft the way I did at Xbox, working in this environment where I was not a gamer myself, but my boss, the same boss I told you about before, told me, you need to be in there because you represent this broader audience than the gamer. And every house with a gamer in it has usually 2 to 5 other people who don't use the Xbox at all. So make it useful to them too. And I thought, oh, wow, okay. So here I am working on a product that I never would have used, frankly. And that itself is valuable if I put it into practice. And after Xbox, I worked on Microsoft Account, working to reduce support costs. Absolutely critical for the company and really useful for the user also, because nobody wants to call support. Nobody wants to need to call support. Then I was also working at privacy at Microsoft, working to reduce regulatory risk. So I got to see it from the business perspective of gaining audience, the business perspective of reducing costs, both support costs and regulatory potential costs and risks. And I was able to take that with me to Google Ads, all about increasing data fidelity as we measured ad exposure. So I had to improve the user experience to increase that data fidelity so that we could make these measurements. Mm-hmm. I also worked at Google Support later, reducing support costs again by powering the AI with this structured, reliable content. Absolutely critical.
So your experience clearly influenced some of the writing you're doing as well, right?
Yeah.
What would you say motivated you to write UX Skills for Business Strategy, and what gap did you feel was existing that wasn't being addressed?
Yeah, great question. So in 2023, I was at a conference and listening to content designers at this conference talking to each other and giving talks about how they needed to understand their business impact. They didn't understand their business impact, and they were getting all these mixed messages about it from their bosses, from their coaches, from their mentors, etc. So I thought, what I need to do is, and this was from my education background, is to determine what are the skills that we actually use in content design, and how does using those skills make business impact, and how can we draw those lines between them? So I started with content design and made surveys and created reports and did a bunch of work behind that. And then I was looking more broadly and talking to people elsewhere in user experience roles, and I knew that there was something there. So then I pulled in Kim Matz and Maya Joseph Gottner to broaden this base to all UX skills and went and pitched it to O'Reilly.
And here you are.
Here I am.
So let's ground that a bit because,
Mm-hmm.
strategy can mean a lot of different things. So how do you define business strategy in a way that's actually useful for people working in product design or content roles?
Yeah, it is. It can feel really squishy to people and really hard to grasp. So the way I think of it is the business strategy is how a business thinks it will get to its goals. And it might have a set of investors that it talks to those goals about. It at some level, the business is saying, hey, here's what we plan to do and how we plan to make money and make these products and make a splash. But that is a long journey with lots of moving parts, usually multiple products, multiple features, multiple positionings in the marketplaces. So business impacts is sort of a subset of business strategy. It's how the impacts are how the business can tell whether it's getting closer to the mark, whether it's getting closer to its goals. So business impacts like financial impacts, user impacts, product impacts, even operational and risk and management, all of those impacts, those ways they check on themselves internally to say, are we getting closer?
Yeah. And so building on that, many teams say they're being strategic, but what are those key signals that a team could be showing that shows they're truly operating strategically rather than just tactically?
Yeah. So I think about this in two different ways. First of all, do they have a business goal? Maybe it's even articulated at all hands. Maybe this is the CEO's favorite thing to say. Do they have a goal that helps them say no to additional work or additional projects? Do they have a goal that lets them determine yes on some things, but no on the vast majority of things that might come their way? So that's the first way. And then the second way is, can they articulate how their impacts or tactics or like the day-to-day work relate to that goal? Does it help the whole business move forward to that goal? Does it protect the business while it makes moves toward a goal? Though, if they can articulate that, and if the goal overall helps them say no to the wrong work, then they are operating strategically.
And that raises a point about who gets to shape strategy, right? So how can individuals who aren't in leadership roles still influence or contribute to business strategy in meaningful ways?
Yeah, so everybody in a business should be contributing to it in a meaningful way. Even if it's just, the shoe company needs to sell more shoes, the shoe salesperson is at the front line of enacting that strategy. We all should be. It may be a very small part, and really everybody, including leadership, is doing a very small part. Leadership's job, as I understand it, is about articulating and communicating and weighing the risks of that strategy and moving toward it. But everybody else is making the strategy work. They're tying the particular impact they're trying to make to that strategy or goal. And they're recommending particular skills or particular work that they can do that makes the impacts that lead to those goals. And, in the best cases in software land, maybe we don't have complete autonomy because mostly we are working in teams of people very collaboratively all the time. But we do have the ability to raise our hand and say, you know what, I want to try this method of getting alignment on this decision and making sure it's the right decision before we go forward.
And, I think part of the challenge is also how strategy is often misunderstood. So what are some of the most common misconceptions you've seen about strategy inside organizations?
I think that the most common thing I see people do, especially if they are 7 levels deep in an organization at a major big tech company, is to think, the strategy isn't that important. As long as we keep our heads down and keep working and deliver, keep developers unblocked, or make it so that we can measure the impact and report on it for our annual reports. As long as we do that, we're fine. But no, there's this idea that strategy won't be understandable unless you have an MBA, or that it's not our business. We should just do what we're told, right? Our job is as order takers so that we can, from product to say, here's the product and here's what it is. That can't be right. That can't be right.
And so when these misconceptions take hold, where do companies most often go wrong when trying to connect strategy to execution?
I don't know about most often. I can speak to my experience, and that is when we have an idea at a high level. So maybe directors in an organization, or even VPs in an organization, have an idea that if these people just did exactly what I told them, then the strategy will come out beautifully. Well, if it's a sufficiently advanced product, and honestly, sufficiently advanced, I mean, if people are going to use it in the thousands, much less millions, then we're dealing with a lot of complexity in that user group. And if we have a single executive or even a group of executives making those tactical decisions about the skills and what should be created and what should be delivered, then we are losing an awful lot of expertise. We're losing an awful lot of insight and inventiveness and innovation that could come out of having the executives set the goals and set the strategy, and having everybody else, actively empowering everybody else to go out and solve those problems in the best possible way.
And you've worked closely with product teams. How can product design and content collaborate more effectively around a shared strategy?
I really like a particular metaphor for collaboration. Often product design, content, and then also developers, marketing, legal, any number of collaborator sets and perspectives, they need to bring their own perspective to it and pull in their own direction. So it's like a giant tug of war, which sounds awful, unless I think of it this way. So think of an old-timey firefighter group. So firefighters arrive at the scene of a burning building, and there's somebody who needs to jump out of the burning building and somehow be caught safely. And firefighters can have this, and these still exist actually, sort of a round trampoline that they all hold the edge of, and so that the person can safely jump into the middle of the trampoline and come down safely. Now, here's the thing. They're only holding it at like waist or chest height above the ground. They need to hold it as tightly as they possibly can. Everybody around the trampoline pulling as hard as they can. And all of them having their eyes on the person who needs to jump, so that all of them with their unique perspectives can get the center of that trampoline into the center of where that person's going to land. We have to do the same thing in product groups. We need to pull against each other as hard as possible, all with the same goal, all with our eyes on getting the person, the user of the experience that we're making, to the center of that target.
And just building on that, right? Strong strategy then it's grounded in real experience and real insight, right? What role does research play and user insight play in shaping a strong business strategy then?
Yeah, so in the firefighter analogy, it's having everybody researching where that person is that they need to jump from. But it's also what my grandpa used to call business fundamentals. If a business needs users, needs customers to buy its experiences, then research and user insights lets you understand them and make sure that you're making the right thing that they'll actually want and use and keep buying, which is critical.
And when you're evaluating strategy yourself, what frameworks or mental models do you rely on most?
Yeah, so I think of things in a very basic way. I look at, does this strategy make money? Or do we need to spend money to make this strategy? And what's the ratio there, right? Like there should be a money in and a money out.
Right.
Also, how does this experience make fans for the company? How does it lose fans for the company, right? Like, is it going to make people more interested in, even if they don't use it immediately, are they going to put it on their wish list for the future? Or is it going to annoy the people who are already fans? And then third, I think about, do the dots connect? Especially for a business strategy involving a product, will it make fans and make money in the wider landscape of the technology being used, the marketplace as it exists right now, and the investors who have an outsized role in making these businesses sink or swim?
So let's shift into AI because, it's rapidly changing how all of this comes to life as well. And as AI generates more content, how do we ensure it remains clear, it's useful, and human-centered?
Yeah, I think that's really critical. That's why actually for the second edition of my first book, I wrote an entirely new chapter about this. It's about how do we set up our features that we're building that AI is embedded into. How do we make those work? Because you could just put an instance of ChatGPT or Claude in there and have users having conversations about things. And we've seen, in fact, that even in the time since I was writing that second edition book, that when companies just sort of stick a general purpose LLM into a product, it doesn't have great outcomes for them in terms of just the token cost of running this all the time. And users, they might use it sort of addictively, but they don't use it purposefully in a lot of those things. So you really need to take a design approach and say, what will people use it for? What is the purpose? What is the strategy? And what is the definition of good when the AI is generating content? We need evaluation by experts, and we need to scale that evaluation by experts to all of the instances that the content is being generated across. And that means constant monitoring and maintenance of the underlying model and retraining for shifts in the domain. People like AI has really put a bright spotlight on how your strongest your AI responses are only as strong as the weakest content they were trained on. So the accuracy of the content, as the world changes, the structure of it, and just the way we use language as a society rapidly changes in unpredictable ways.
Yeah. So from what you've seen so far, do you think AI is improving user experiences, or are we risking making them just more confusing at scale?
I think that AI isn't improving or disimproving them, but the businesses that are creating them are. These are business strategy decisions. The businesses are in charge of setting their own bar for risk, for quality, for attractiveness. And there's the concept of enshittification from Cory Doctorow. That's happening for strategic purposes throughout the software ecosystem. And really, this is where I think we're going to go back to business fundamentals, where we are building things that users want and need because that will be good for the business. The outsized impact that investors are having in this right now, in part to perpetuate this AI usage to make it happen. Those kinds of cycles historically have only lasted so long.
So from your perspective, what does AI readiness look like for product, for UX, and for content teams?
Yeah, so this is, I think, a critical question for anybody working in the industry right now. It means the AI readiness really means understanding the underlying technology to know its advantages and its limits. Like everybody working on it should know about the vector space that these probability tables exist within. We should also have familiarity with how people are using the tools, the prompts, the retrieval, the frameworks that are actually working to get the outputs that we need. Now, we also need habits to counter the known effects of AI overuse, like AI dementia or cognitive surrender that's happening when people are using AI extremely habitually.
And as these tools become more embedded, how do you see AI enhancing the content design process?
Yeah, I think what they're doing for the content design process and for the overall design process is speeding up the delivery of iterations of artifacts. And that was a lot of nouns and adjectives in a row. So it makes things super fast. It tends to make the wrong thing super fast. So we end up having more and more iterations of it, which sometimes can be a very positive thing and sometimes can introduce new ideas, which is great. But the artifacts themselves are just the receipts for the design work and the design decisions. So that's where we really need the UX pros, the product pros saying, hey, we have a hypothesis that this design will work better because of these user-centered reasons.
Yeah. And how are you seeing teams actually leverage AI in UX writing today? Is it elevating the user experience? Is it just accelerating production? What are you seeing?
I think there is some acceleration of production in that people can go to these new tools within, like, especially embedded within Figma, embedded within the design of the experience, and say, oh, generate a string for me that means these things, which is great. Just like people haven't had to worry about misspelling things for a long time, we can have adequate or mediocre text generated on the fly. However, when I talk to people, especially in big companies where they have mandates to use AI more and more frequently, I'm seeing people work a lot harder and working even longer hours. They're working harder to learn the new tools, but even when they learn the new tools, they are using AI more and more to just generate more of it without necessarily improving their decision making about it. So I think that tool use here is still in its early stages.
Yeah. And that leads to a question around skills. What skills should professionals focus on developing to stay relevant in a world where, AI is generating content, interfaces, other things?
Yeah. In our new book, we actually wrote new skills about, so there's a skill about integrating LLMs into experiences, because there is a lot of skill around that. There are things to consider that we've never had to consider before. But there's also a skill about designing with new technology, or designing for new technology, where whenever we have new technologies arise, we need to say, how do these fit in? What are the norms going to be? How can we adjust that? Which ones are good for people? Which ones are not good in an emerging way that we need to protect people from? And we need to protect our business from the risk that is associated with that. So those two are big skills for that. But I think that a huge one is researching, designing, and defining what good means for the user and the organization. And at the same time, people need to separate their own value from the value of creating artifacts. The value we bring is in the decisions we make, the ideas we synthesize, the ideas we come up with new, not how rapidly we create a new wireframe.
And given the focus of Starter Inc. on continuous learning, leadership development, how can organizations build teams that are not just AI enabled, but also AI responsible and human centered?
I really like this question, and I like this viewpoint that Starter Inc. is taking. I think that if we focus on business fundamentals, not just AI adoption rates, then we're all going to be in a better place. Our businesses, our employees, our users, everybody. At the same time, we need to focus on the business impacts. What are the things we're doing to make our businesses viable in the long run? Now, that's all sort of very business-centered thinking, but the humans inside those businesses really need to have for themselves, and they need to be encouraged for clear thinking. They need to be encouraged to take responsibility, to communicate, to collaborate with each other, and not just with an AI that doesn't store and maintain and establish relationships with the people who will help you get your next job.
So finally, if you could give one piece of advice to someone trying to think more strategically in their day-to-day, regardless of their role, what would it be?
Yeah, I'm going to give you two categories of role here. So for business stakeholders, I want them to take away clarity about how UX skills and focusing on the user experience makes good business sense. And for UX pros, people who are doing user experience work in their day-to-day, I want them to have a sense of power and agency in their UX careers and understand that this is all about the users and making it good for them, but it's also about making enough money for the businesses that they can hire us.
This is great. Torrey, this has been incredibly insightful, especially the way you've connected strategy and execution and the evolving role of AI. So thank you so much for your perspective and for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Vaishali.
And we'll see you next time on Starter TV.